Now I'd like to introduce Greg Meyer, who's the principal of Stantec, and Chin Chin, who's the architectural designer at Stantec, to share their story on the Heilongjiang World Cultural Heritage Site, which is a fortress, I believe. Thank you.
I don't know what that was. Well, hello everybody. Hope you're still awake after lunch and had a good cup of coffee there during the break time. We do want to thank you for this opportunity and thank TEA for allowing us to make this presentation. And thank you, Bingo, for that great presentation as well. It was very fascinating. Bingo said that he should be the one most fearful in presenting today based on his project. I think we take that credit. We are going to be the most low-tech project presented here today. This has nothing to do really, I mean, there is some technology involved in the project, but very low-tech, very low budget. But what we think is important about this project called Heilongjiang, and I better grab the pointer here, is the idea that it's a world cultural heritage destination. And for us, it was just very fascinating. I mean, our group as Stantec, we worked in the theme entertainment arena, of course, worked with Disney and Universal, Merlin, just like many of us do. But for us, this was a very exciting project because it's based on an authentic story in China's history that almost nobody knows about. We all know about Great Wall, we all know about the Forbidden City, but no one knows about Heilongjiang. Oh, by the way, I am Greg, not to be confused with
I'm Chen Chen. 大家好，我叫赵浅浅，我是一个景观设计师。I'm actually a landscape designer with Stantec.
So just like Bingo, I'm not an architect either. We're both landscape architects, and we drew the small straws when it came time to attend SATE. But our architectural team was obviously heavily involved on this, and we'll be able to speak to the architecture. But again, Heilongjiang, it's an amazing story that, like I said, no one really knows about, and so that's the purpose of this project. It's based in geopolitics, right? We all like geopolitics right now, right? It's all in the news. Well, what's interesting, it was in the news in the 8th century. It was in the news in the 9th century. This project actually expands 8 centuries of time up to the Ming Dynasty and actually ends at the beginning of the 16th century. And when I say geopolitics, it has to do with this idea that there was a form of government that existed in China that had local rulers or chieftains, if you will, and it was called Tusei. Did I pronounce that right?
Right, Tusei.
Tusei. And that form of government was something that was handed down. So you had by family or clan, if you will, right? So generation after generation after generation. And these people that ruled had complete autonomy. He was the general. He was the one that controlled the military and defended the people in that region. He was the judge and the jury, right? So all matters that had to do with anything important was decided by this individual. He was the legislature as well, right? All the laws and rules, and they could enforce them because he, remember, was the general. So this is a form of a government, if you will, that at the beginning of the Ming Dynasty in the 16th century, they decided they didn't like that anymore. Wanted a more central form of government where they would control and appoint rulers in regions throughout China. And so the last general of the Tusei era rebelled against that. And this project is about that story, that rebellion, and trying to defend their heritage that lasted almost 8 centuries. Next. So moving people. This project definitely ties into this theme that's part of what our SATE conference is about. It literally ties into this idea of physically moving people from a arrival area to this fortress site. And we'll go into more detail why that's important because of its location. It also, we think, moves people emotionally. And that's what we were trying to do with our client, was trying to connect people to this authentic story in China's history that no one knows about. So it starts with this idea of a story. But this is a story that was based on a vision of our client. And it's obviously based in true history of China. And it's based in a true location in China as well. And by combining those elements into a framework, it became the basis for creating this immersive environment where we bring you emotionally and connect you with this fortress story of Howlington. Chen, you want to let everyone know where this project is located?
Sure. Our project is located at Zunyi, Guizhou province. Hopefully everyone have an idea of where we are. We're in Beijing, right?
No, Shanghai. Oops.
So many of you may or may not know Guizhou province is known for its rich culture and natural resources. The heart of our project, as Greg mentioned before, is the Heilongtan 2C Fortress. I'm curious to know, have any of you heard about Heilongtan before? Please raise your hand if you have.
Yeah.
You do? Yeah, I see one hand up. So, no worry, I'm Chinese. I grew up in China. I never heard of Heilongtan before I actually work on this project. So today, we are going to take all of you on a journey to the Heilongtan Fortress. About 2.5 kilometers away from the fortress, this is our proposed conference center and retreat. This site was used by the soldier to train and keep horses. It's also known as a horse-keeping town by local people. According to research and study, at one time there were over 10,000 horses at this particular location. On the south side of our conference center is the RD&E Village, which will be our main focus of today's presentation. Near the village is our tea farm. Everyone knows we're Chinese, we love tea. About 2 years ago, they just opened a campground at this place. You can also consider it as glamping area, which means glamorous camping. So for those of you who enjoy to stay at ultra luxury hotel, I would recommend this place for you to check it out.
Okay.
So our client of this project is Legend Tourism Investment. They have this idea to create an integrated tourism destination considering historical, cultural, and natural aspects. Before Heilongtan, we worked on 2 other projects with them together. The first project is Chadao, located in the Great Wall Scenic Area in Beijing. One idea behind this project is to reconsidering traffic order. So we want to keep traffic bus and cars outside the scenic area. There will be a shuttle train to transport our guests from the parking lot to the RD&E, through the transportation hub, and then finally to their attraction. The second project is a spiritual heritage site located in Tianzishan, Hunan. The project has 3 phases. It covers an area over 960 acres. The idea is to create a cultural experience within a themed RD&E village. Right now, phase 1 is under construction. Later this year, it will be open to the guests. So when we work with our client, I think all of you will agree with me, we want to keep a good relationship. So this photo was taken after we hiked all the way to the Sea Fortress with our client. This handsome gentleman here is the chairman of Legend Group. I mean, every chairman is handsome. The lady in the center, she is the chairman's wife, Rina, and I'm not sure who this guy is.
Thanks. Appreciate that. So a little bit of a funny story. I mean, we actually we spent several days at this site as well as the horse keeping, the conference center site, and the tea farm. So a couple of days each one hiking. Very steep topography. The funny story, 2 funny stories to this is one, Jonathan Douglas in the tan pants, if he were to turn around, the back of his pants are completely brown with clay because that hillside that we came down was wet. It had been raining, and he took about a 20-foot slide down that. So that was kind of interesting. And then the other one, I look like I'm doing okay, but 2 nights before, we were in Henan Island looking at another potential project with Legend, and I'm not even sure if they're still proceeding with that one or not, but I was traveling with my 2 cohorts there, and the night at the hotel, Mr. Chen wanted to take us out to eat some street food. And I thought, that sounds interesting. For some reason, Jonathan and Daryl there said, no, we're tired. We're just going to go to that can't be good. We're going to go to the hotel and rest. So I had to go with the chairman and his wife and the team, right, to eat the street food. And it was great. I mean, I was pounding down steak on a stick and fish on a stick and drinking Heinekens. It was just wonderful, right? Until about 3 hours later in the hotel. And whatever stuff that they cook in that all Chinese people are immune to, I am not. Next 8 hours were just terrible. That's all I can tell you. So it was really tough on me to hike up to that site. So now we want to tell you a little bit about a story behind the story. Actually, the main destination for this project is that fortress site because of its historical significance. Later, we're going to talk more about the RD&E site because that's what primarily we were hired for. But this project was actually designated in 2015 by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. And for us, that was a great advantage as we were working on the project because there was so much project documentation in order to get that designation. So for us, the learning curve was made much easier by having that information available to us. We also had the advantage that the client had a team from Tsinghua University in Beijing that understood historical period architecture of that time. And so they were there on board to help advise our architectural team as well about authenticity. But one of the other key tasks for us was to assist the client's archaeological team. So there was a lot of archaeological surveys that had to be done, verifying locations and uses on top of this fortress site. And remember, this is almost a 300-acre site. And at the time of that rebellion, they had almost 140,000 soldiers encamped on top of this fortress, along with those 10,000 horses. So, and the only way to get up on top of this, I'm going to go back, sorry, is these steps. And it's amazing. That's almost killed me just going up there. Each one of those steps is almost 3 feet you have to take up at a time. And so it's just nearly vertical as a climb. And today, the fortress site is obviously open to tourists, but you're not allowed to go up those steps any longer because they're trying to preserve the integrity of those structures. These gates were interesting. There's a series, I think, if I remember correctly, 6 gates. Yep. And these gates are obviously a part of the defense system, and there was a series of walls as well. The client also wanted us, because of our involvement with tourism, to assist their team with doing surveys as well and field studies and sketches. So working alongside the archaeological team, we had 3 people for about 40 days. They actually camped up there. They set up a campsite and they spent all their time up there, and people were bringing water and food up, and I'm not sure how they carried it up those steps, but they did. And so we would study these sites and try to help them define these are locations that we think are significant, and this is where you need to place interpretive signage, wayfinding, creating the pathways, what's the circulation routes. We did numerous studies with that archaeological team. Then all that information was compiled into this booklet, if you will, of over 100 pages that was passed on to another consultant out of Australia, and they're the ones that actually developed all that interpretive signage. We also worked, obviously, with this idea of moving people, and we'll talk more about that at the RD&E site, but how to get people from one elevation to another elevation and how to transport them. So we studied different ways of doing that, and ultimately it came down to 2 ideas. One, which was low budget, a tram system, and then the second was, in the future, once attendance increases over time, they'd like to implement a gondola, kind of an aerial tram system to take you up. So on the basis of this time that we spent with the client and the team there, we came up with what we thought was a simple diagram that kind of became a framework, if you will, for this journey to the fortress. And it all starts with this idea of arrival. Legend originally was in the business, tourism business, of as a tour guide, if you will, taking people on their bus, going to Badaling, the Great Wall. You do your 2-hour walk on the wall, get back on the bus, go to the next stop. And they were doing that, but they thought, the chairman, Mr. Chen, was very interested in these historic sites, and he created this idea, this vision of we can extend that stay. and enhance that stay by creating these RD&E villages that are authentic and part of a story that ties to the destination, the ultimate destination. And then they would still be in the business, obviously, of transporting people, moving people from that RD&E village and arrival area to the actual destination. And in this case, it included obviously the fortress, but as well as the conference center in the future when they develop that, and the existing tea farm now.
So here are some site photos of the conference center and retreat. If I'm going to use only one sentence to describe the site, I'm going to quote a Chinese saying, 靠山吃山,靠水吃水, which means living from what the land and sea can provide. As you can see from these photos, local residents, they rely on farming. They use the slope of the mountain to create a terrain for the purpose of effective farming. And taking the advantage of a land which was already clear, we create conference center and retreat for guests to relax and enjoy their staying.
So our scope of work was actually developing these simple concepts. And so we did really basic modeling, nothing like some of the previous presentations like Jan showed us earlier, but it was enough to communicate the message and the intent of the story. Next.
So this rendering here, you can see the meeting rooms, outdoor dining, and hospitality suites, along with the outdoor performance, challenging courses. And now, I think it's a great time for us to start the real story.
Right. So it was just so interesting for us to get involved on this project that was so significant, to that time frame and to that region. And the challenge became, how do we move people? How do we connect them? It is a UNESCO site, so with UNESCO sites, there's these preservation areas, if you will. Imagine like concentric circles radiating out, and any buildings that were foreign to that time frame had to be removed. And so there were some people that lived there. All that had to be removed. There was a visitor center that was built that had nothing to do architecturally with that time frame. It was this modern, curvilinear form that had to go away. So we couldn't do anything at the base of that mountain where we were transporting people. So we had to find another location in order to create this sense of arrival, and then begin what I'm calling in our themed industry kind of a pre-show idea of immersing people into that story and time frame. So this site location, Chin, if you want to point, it's about a 60-acre site. And what's interesting about it is completely surrounded by these steep slopes, much like the Hallenton site. But it's also leveled out because the local farming community has been there for a long time, obviously living off that land. And it was a beautiful site because there's a river that flowed through it. So as we spent time on that site, we came up with this basic storyline of the big what if. So what if over time, back in the 7th century when this started, the military they had an encampment in this valley area because it was a great place to water the horses. There was grasses there to feed the horses. It was a great place to do maneuvers, drills and whatever to train the soldiers. And that became this basis that over time, instead of like a lot of times in our theme parks, I heard someone say, and then, oh no, something bad happens, right? In this case, something good happens. The village continues to grow. Merchants start to come there. The blacksmith sets up a shop. A tanner sets up a shop to create leather goods. The baker comes to help feed the soldiers. And they have their families. And so this village grows organically along the riverbank. And so that led to this idea of another simple diagram of how people would flow or move through this initial destination in order to get them to the final destination, the fortress. And all of this is done outside of that UNESCO preservation zone, if you will. We could develop this. But the idea was to develop it in a sense that was sensitive to the architecture of that time frame. So we have 4 parts to talk about: the arrival, what we call the village, the RD&E Village, the visitor center, and then the hub that moves people to the fortress. Because that site, it has this kind of a linear north-south relationship. That diagram, it's so linear, it laid out quite nicely for us on that site. So to the south, we have the parking area and arrival area. Then there's a gateway, arrival plaza, if you will, that takes guests through that village. And then from the village to the visitor center, which is the orientation and pre-show, if you will, to the fortress site. And then from there, the transportation hub. And by tram, guests are moved to the fortress site. You see number two, an idea of a future hotel. The client has in mind that once attendance starts exceeding a certain number, then they think that they could add a hospitality component to this to extend that stay even further. And so that laid out quite nicely into an illustrative master plan that was basically at a conceptual level still, and that was used to get initial government approvals to do and move forward with the project, and the client initiated that using these planning documents. So let's talk a little bit more about that journey through the RD&E Village and what that is all about. Like I said, we have four key components: the arrival, the RD&E Village, the Visitor Center Museum, and the hub. So one thing interesting about the arrival sequence is we're about, I would say, 50% complete with this concept package, and the client calls and says, we need to come up with a location for an exit from a tunnel. Tunnel? We didn't know about a tunnel. So this thing's completely surrounded by mountains. And when they got government approval, local government was so, or regional government, the governor was so excited about this project. He said, what if we build a tunnel underneath that mountain on the east side that connects directly to the highway out of Zunyi to take away the travel time. It takes almost over an hour over this little 2-lane road to go up and over the mountain and back down again. So, I mean, that makes sense. So the client says, but I need a location. Where's it going to come out? Because they want to start. And not only that, what's the elevation? It needs to exit out in order that it works properly with what you're doing. I don't know. We haven't done a grading plan. We're in concepts. So that was an interesting side story. But actually, it worked out quite well because we ultimately decided that the exit of the tunnel should be where we think it should be in relation to the RD&E Village. And it just so happens that that exit of the tunnel lined up with an opposing mountain face on the west side that had this granite outcropping, or cliff face, if you will. And we thought that was a great thing. Your first view is looking out across, seeing that view, and the idea in the future of possibly a stone carving of horsemen. And even at nighttime, once numbers increase, they could do projection potentially up there. So there's where the technology could come in the future. But this created the gateway, if you will, into an arrival plaza to the village site. So the village site, as I said, is based on this idea of creating this storyline that became the framework or basis of design for us, and trying to be true to the architecture. So we had all this data from the UNESCO submission. We had the Tsinghua University architects helping us, and we're from Florida, and our architectural team is all from Florida. So we had to rely on that information to have something that seemed to have integrity to that location, place, and history. So we developed a series of graphics along with that conceptual master plan, all used to help illustrate the ideas that there easily could have been this sense of people living there, that there were people there that had shops there, and now these are all repurposed as opportunities for retail. Retail here, the idea would be local craftsmen and artists selling their works at this location related to the project, as well as dining. Obviously, it could be locally sourced food, farm-to-table type ideas. And then entertainment has to do with this idea of creating plaza areas for small shows and performance, as well as the military parade area becoming a larger outdoor show as well. So that's the village area. And then the main idea was that as people went through this village, they would ultimately wind up at the visitor center. And this became the main orientation for them as the pre-show, as I was saying, to get them prepared for what they're about to see at the fortress site. So it became a visitor center with some semi-quality museum idea. So there were some artifacts there from the historic site. There was a small multimedia show that was done in a small room, smaller than this. There was some interpretive signage and other displays there to help communicate the idea. It's also a place where you bought your ticket, so there's some revenue generation for the client that would transport them up to the Fortress site via the tram. And there was also an exit retail gift shop as well, right? So everyone has to go through the visitor center to get to the Fortress, and they have to come back through the visitor center and through the village, right? It's a very strong mall theme park concept, right? You park, you go through an experience to get to the ultimate destination and right back through it again. We've done that before. Rendering just again, and so these graphics, all these things are packaged together for a presentation to local authorities for that initial government approval. And pretty much that's where our work stopped on this project. Then all this was turned over to the client's planning and design team, as well as a local team to implement. And what we found interesting, did I get it wrong? No, sorry. Oh, the hub. I forgot to talk about the hub. I jumped ahead. What do I got? I'm out of time. So we developed a hub with a future gondola, and we did a quick video of the village area. Just, it's not completely developed, that's for sure, right? It's just a simple massing model, right? But it helped to communicate the story. You can see in the background, future hotel site that was supposed to be themed like castle or that sort of a sense. But what was interesting to us, the client has built us. They have built this village. The tunnel is there, the exit out of the tunnel, the parking to the south, the whole village area following the river, the visitor center, and that hub.
Here's a nighttime view towards the visitor center. Next one shows the daily activity and shows happening at the site. I know we are running out of time, but please take your phone, take a photo of this. If you can find Greg and myself in one of these photos, we are going to buy tickets to the Highlanton to see Fortress. How about that? This one is a riverside walk.
Oh, wait, that was too fast?
Yeah.
We're out of time.
Yeah. This is a riverside view with promenade walkway. And this ruining gate recalled one of the gates at the 2C Fortress. And this one is the front entrance of the visitor center.
So thank you very much, and thank you for the time that you've given us. I want to say one quick thing is that, you know, we all have one thing in common for sure, and that is time, right? We all have time. But one thing I find fascinating in this industry is that people actually choose, elect to choose their own free time to visit the destinations that all of us create. And that's an amazing thing. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg and Chin Chin. Thank you.